Hello everyone, welcome to my channel, Books with Nate. I'm your host, Nate, and today I'm going to be reviewing House of Chains by Stephen Erickson. It's the fourth book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. But going forward, I'll also be looking at sci-fi and other fantasy books and fiction, and just kind of that stuff in general. I know that my first video is 4 books into a rather large series, but I read Guards of the Moon just about over a year ago, and I feel like trying to sort of recount that now wouldn't really do it justice. But recently finishing House of Chains, I was sort of inspired to try and give YouTube another Malazan video instead of annoying my fiance with all my thoughts. So here we are. This video is going to be structured sort of into non-spoilers and general thoughts first, and then into spoilers and just sort of discussions around certain aspects of the books I like, that I didn't like. Yeah, I'm just excited to talk about this. So House of Chains is the 4th installment in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and it kind of acts as a sequel to Dead House Gates, like Memories of Ice is a sequel to Gardens of the Moon. And we follow, at the beginning, Karsa Orlong, who's sort of from this barbarian type tribe, kind of in the mountains of Genebacus, and we sort of follow him sort of throughout the book. He's one of the main POV characters, and then we also, see that he's a powerful warrior, and that he's also just a very compelling character. And I would definitely recommend reading this book just to see more about him. I think a whole video could just be made about him. And then it also follows the Malazan Empire as they try to sort of take back the continent of the 7 cities and sort of strike at the heart of the holy desert of Raraku. And we sort of follow to Adjunct Vor, Felisin, Aborek, sort of characters that we've heard of or interacted with from the previous books. So there are some carryover characters from Dead House Gates, which is great to see. So the first 3 books kind of acted as this overall arc, and they were kind of completed, but there were still definitely threads that kind of came through from those books into this book, because I wasn't sure what to expect in this book, as I'm sure most people are with any Malazan book. But yeah, it was, I think, sort of bringing in these new stories and these new storylines into the universe, I think was really well done. And I was surprised by a few things, and there were definitely some lore dumps to sort of expand the universe a little bit more and expand the characters more. And speaking of characters, I think Erickson did a really good job of sort of exploring the themes, what I saw, themes of regret, grief, revenge. I think sort of seeing how those themes came through these characters, it was just such a fascinating read yet again. And of course, there's the larger themes of colonialism and imperialism, and as always, compassion. And so those are kind of my general thoughts about the book. It's kind of hard to not talk about spoilers, so I'm just going to start talking about some spoilers now. So Karsa Orlong, just what a fascinating and compelling character. I really didn't like him at first, and I don't think I still do, but I think Erickson's ability to sort of ask the question of, can this person change? Can you, sort of understand where this character is coming from? I think it was very well executed for this character, especially considering how many horrible things he did. And it really, makes me question sort of my own morals and beliefs about, people in general, which I think was kind of the goal. And really, ask the question of, can you feel compassion towards a character like this? Because, seeing where he comes from, he's almost a product of his social situation and cultural situation, being from the Teblor, and sort of going upon this warlike path, and then essentially getting his friends killed in the process, who, kind of eventually end up, he builds these statues to him, or sorry, he builds these statues to them, rather. I'd imagine there's probably a Carsa Orlung statue somewhere. But, and then they kind of follow him, throughout the second half of the book mostly, and seeing that he is, the Toblakai, from Dead House Gates, and understanding, that Habork saw these chains of the people that he's killed, and that they're kind of haunting him, and they're all saying to him, "Lead us, war leader." I think it's just such a, complex way to sort of look at something like regret. And um, yeah, and then also the theme of revenge with Karsa, and with Felisin and others. I think there's a lot of interesting ways that those themes came up. And more on revenge in Karsa, seeing that he sort of realized that he was being sort of exploited by these gods that they worshipped, and realizing that they were Talanai Mas and not, Teblor gods, essentially. Um, I just think, and also putting that with how he's essentially on a war path against the crippled god, even though he's the knight of the House of Chains, and he's going to break the crippled god's chains and then kill him. That was just such a cool way to sort of show how regret and revenge kind of come into play with him. I think it was just such a it was just really fascinating to read, and I really enjoyed reading the sections. I enjoyed the first part of the book, just following him, but I really just loved sort of reading his own internal dialogue and his encounters with, the ghosts that follow him and his friends, and then, you know telling the his gods to f off. you know I just think that was such a cool idea, and such a great thing to read. I also think the Felisin and Tavor storyline uh, was really fascinating as well. They're both sort of held to these higher standards, that they kind of need to be cold and in charge. I think Tavor maybe shows this more so than Shaik or Felisin, um, but they're still kind of expected to be these leaders in these very tense, you know, situations where any one thing could mean the ruin for the Malazan army or the army of the apocalypse. And with Shaik or Felisin, um, you know, trying to see that, like, she's still sort of this teenager, who's been really hurt, um, and seeing her kind of trying to balance it out with being Shaik. I think one example of this was when she's in this war meeting, and she finds out that her brother Perrin is still alive, and she kind of waits for everybody to leave, and then Hoborik is just there, and she essentially breaks down and is like, "Oh my god, my brother's still alive." She thought her whole family was dead or abandoned her, and I think seeing that was just really compelling. And then also when Hoborik sets up the wards to, um, get rid of Shaik from Felisin's body for that moment, and sort of seeing this, timid, scared person at the center of who Shaik and Felisin is, it was just really sad. um, and yeah, and then how she was killed by her own sister. Her sister doesn't even know that, you know Tavor doesn't know that she killed her sister, because kind of at the last moment, Shaik leaves the body of Felisin, and the only people who know that are Lestariel and Pearl, which a great duo, by the way. But um, yeah, just sort of seeing how this, again, this sort of theme of revenge, like Felisin like wants to take revenge against her family and her sister, and sort of how that all sort of came to a head in kind of this almost anticlimactic way, but it was still very impactful because sort of at the end it was just Felisin and her sister kills her. It's hard to explain, but I just think that was a really sad, sort of end to that. And sort of speaking on the Malazans, it was great to see Fid again. I really liked sort of seeing him sort of take command of sort of his own group of bridge burners, essentially, and sort of um, him trying to, understand others in his group. Like when he finds out that the bridge burners are all dead, and he encounters, I think, Bottle, maybe, or no, it was the one of the Wiccan uh, wizardy people, uh, and sort of them kind of understanding that they have to be these sort of almost stoic, that's not the right word, but these very composed people, because they're leading a group of people who don't know what's going on and don't know if they're going to die. And yeah, it was just really cool to see those. And then also another Malazan gamut, that was also just a great thing to read. He was somebody who had a lot of doubts about being put in command as a fist for the army, because all he knew, he was a soldier and then he became a bodyguard, and he kind of just has all these doubts about himself. And sort of his first time in command, he charges to go try and save his men, but ends up getting a lot of them killed or injured, and he sort of lives, and he gets injured in the process, and he kind of lives with this for a bit. And then sort of at the end, you know he dies, and these ghosts from Uraku essentially tell him, like, be a soldier again, and he sort of finds this happiness in that, because all of his actions that he had taken before, that's what a soldier would do, um, instead of a commander or a fist or whatever it might be. Yeah, it was just really great to read that as well. And then just sort of a larger thought. So Osric was living in a memory of Viraku, and if so, that is such a cool idea, to sort of have this living and breathing part of the natural world that has, because you don't really think about the history of like the physical place you're in too much, starting back hundreds of thousands of years. Um, and the fact that this desert was sort of this living and breathing place, and is this living and breathing place, was just really interesting to see. And you know I just think that's such a interesting way to think about sort of the world that you're in a little bit more. And I think it like floods or something and becomes the sea again. I don't really remember, but I think that was just a sort of interesting way to sort of bring about a conclusion, sort of maybe to Baraku. And I really also liked the Troll and Onrag duo. That was hilarious to read. I love whenever a Talani Mass and somebody who wants to talk a lot comes head to head, like in Memories of Ice with Tool and I forget her name, but just sort of having this sort of like deadpan, sort of says one or two things. It's a very blunt, and then just sort of somebody who's a little bit more exuberant and wants to talk more about things. Uh, I just love that stuff. But there's also some negative sides. Kalam. Kalam kind of fell flat for me. I didn't really like his sections that much. That just felt a little forced in there. I do like the character a lot, but I just don't think his sections were that interesting, to be honest. And then also the Cutter Apsalar storyline was kind of hit or miss, but just to kind of wrap it around with themes, there is a quote that I want to read. So this quote is from when Darist and Cutter, or Cutter, are they're talking to each other. They just kind of meet, and Cutter's sort of worried about Apsalar because he thinks she's dead, and this is what Darist says to him: "Death is not an unkind fate," Darist said above him. "If she was a friend, you will miss her company, and that is the true source of your grief. Your sorrow is for yourself. My words may displease you, but I speak from experience. I felt the deaths of many of my kin, and I mourn the spaces in my life where they once stood. But such losses serve only to ease my own impending demise." And that isn't to take away from people's grief. You know, I don't necessarily agree with it, but I think in the context of this story, and just sort of perhaps grief in general, you just try and think about sort of these relationships in your life, and you know like with Karsa Orlong, sort of those spaces that the deaths of his friends left. I just think, sort of to wrap it all up, those themes really struck true for me, and really struck true for me in this book. So, I really love this series so far, and it's the reason why I decided to do this for a video, and I really want to make more going forward. And I just really want to be able to interact with a great community, and also just get into some other books and discussions. So I gave this book a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Yeah. Have you sort of started Malazan? Let me know in the comments. Have you given it a try? Definitely recommend it. Please subscribe if you want. No pressure. And thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.